This is Joe Carpenter. Today is July the 10th, 2021, and I'm interviewing Amador Cano for the first time. This interview is taking place at the home of Axel Martinez in Somerset, Texas. The interview is sponsored by the College of Liberal Arts and is part of the Maverick Veterans Voices Project. Thank you for being here.
Good to be here.
Where are you from originally, and what can you tell me about your growing up?
I was born and raised in Corpus Christi, Texas. And we grew up poor. It was a good life. We never knew we were poor because mom and dad always made sure we had something to eat. We had a pair of jeans and a good pair of shoes and a couple of shirts. So we were happy. We didn't know. We were just happy.
Where did you go to high school?
I went to Floyd Moody High School, which happened to be right behind our home.
There in Corpus Christi?
There in Corpus Christi.
And were you involved in ROTC in high school?
No, I wasn't. I was in band and I played the trumpet. But I kept trying to get into sports, and I finally broke into the high school basketball team in my junior year. And it was good. It was great. I also ran track.
And were any of your family in the military?
None of my immediate family served. However, I had uncles on my mother's side that went to Vietnam. I had Uncle Danny and Uncle Marcus. Marcus was Air Force Communications. Uncle Danny was a signal person, and he told me some stories about how gruesome it was in Vietnam.
How did you become interested in the military?
It's kind of a short story. Mom and Dad was working as a construction guy, and Mom, she was a maid for this judge named Bernie there in Corpus Christi. And so the judge had tutors that tutored his kids, and she would bring me. And so the judge allowed me to sit in and get some of the tutoring. And of course, I eventually spoke English before I spoke Spanish. And in doing the reading assignments, I selected George Armstrong Custer. And I was really mesmerized by the idea of West Point and serving. So that was the beginning of it.
So how then did you come to choose the University of Texas at Arlington?
I didn't. It chose me. I was married to my first wife then, and I was working during the day and going to school at night at Tarrant County Junior College. And one day I was coming in to register, and a captain pulled me over and said, "Hey, you look like a Vietnam vet." And I said, "No, sir, I've never been in the Army." So how would you like to have the Army pay for your school? And his name was Captain Smith. And I said, "Okay, you got my attention." One thing led to another, and so I joined the Corps Cadets. I was still going to Tarrant County, but I finished out the year, and then I transferred over to the University of Texas at Arlington.
And what year was that?
I did that in 1977.
And what was your major?
Physical education.
Why did you choose that major?
Well, to be quite honest with you, it was the easiest major I could find because I wanted to be an Army officer. I wanted to be a Ranger. And an officer has to have a degree.
Right.
And so it was a means to an end for me.
Was there anyone on the faculty who influenced you?
Command Sergeant Major Lopez. He was my mentor. He took me under his wing. In fact, it was his idea. The Army had just opened up Ranger School to cadets from West Point and ROTC. And he knew I wanted to go regular Army. I didn't know what that was. I just wanted to be active duty. And he said, if you go to Ranger School and get your Ranger tab, you'll come back with a regular Army commission. And he explained to me what that meant. Obviously, today that's not the same. But back then, the nucleus of the Army, if Congress drew us down to nothing, the regular Army officers would stay on active duty, all things being equal. And reserve officers on active duty would be the first to go. So I said, okay, that sounds good. I'm a career guy. I already knew it.
And what year did you graduate?
I'm year group 80, but I was supposed to graduate summer of 1980, and I failed my algebra course.
I see.
And so I had to take another course, a couple of courses. And I had an assignment to the what people call the Elite Airborne Unit, the 82nd Airborne Division. And when I read books about the devils in baggy pants, because I did a lot of reading, not just about Custer, I decided that's where I want to go. And I had an assignment there, and they kept it for me, but I had to get there on November the 14th, 1980. And so I took all the exams early and had a tutor. And I took the final exam and passed it, and Dr. Netterman approved me to receive my diploma. And they wrote me a letter that the Army needed. It said he has met all the requirements. He will graduate with his class some date in December. But I got on a plane and left for Fort Bragg on November the 13th.
So now you, at that time, let me understand, you could get your Ranger tab before you were actually active duty Army. Is that correct?
That's correct. I was in the first group based on what they did in 1977. They approved it. So I was in the first group that went, actually, that's not true. I was the second group. The year before, they had sent some cadets. And so I was the second group to go with 3. And they allowed that to happen for so many years, and then they stopped.
Then you were commissioned really prior to graduation, is that correct?
Yes, sir, I was. They had a Airborne National Guard, 36th Brigade Airborne, existed then. Parachute Infantry Regiment, 143rd and the 142nd. And I had finished Ranger School and had gone there without going to Airborne School. So I was a leg ranger going through Ranger School. And then I got my commission as a second lieutenant in the infantry, and I was assigned to the Alpha Company, first of the 143rd Airborne Infantry. And my company headquarters are right there in Arlington. Yeah, so I went there, and they made me a platoon leader. And Captain Quigley, my first company commander, he was a 82nd Airborne veteran from Vietnam, 3rd Brigade, fought in Vietnam. And so he took me under his wing and taught me a lot.
So how would you describe that training experience, leaving UTA and going into Army training? How would you describe that experience?
Well, I kind of did it backwards. I went to the unit, went out with them on their monthly jaunts, and I was trained up by Captain Quigley. And at one point, we jumped into Fort Hood, and he killed everybody except me, all the officers. So I took over the company and made a mess of it. But I learned a heck of a lot. And most importantly, I learned you have to depend on your non-commissioned officers and enlisted. They know what they got to do. All they need is a man that's going to lead them from the front and let them go, give them a mission, and they'll do it. And that was a lesson I learned. Captain Quigley made sure of that.
What was your first assignment after training?
My first assignment after I left the Guard and graduated, signed into the 82nd Airborne, they weren't expecting me because I wasn't part of the normal summer rotation. So I had been told by someone, and I think it was Sergeant Major Lopez, report in your Class A's. Do not put on leadership tabs. Report in jump boots. I've taught you how to do that. And find out everything you can about the unit you want to go to, and then sign in the 18th Airborne Corps. So that's what I did. And I got assigned to the 82nd Airborne, and then they assigned me to 1st Brigade, 1st of the 504th Airborne Infantry.
And what were your first duties then?
Well, it's funny. Lieutenant Colonel Akers, who made 2 stars, retired at 2-star, he brought me into his office, and the first thing he did was look to see if I had a Ranger tab on my left shoulder. And then he looked at my wings. And then he looked at the rest of me, all in about nanoseconds. He had a picture of me before I opened my mouth. And so where do you want to go? So I want to be a platoon leader, sir. I've got platoon leader experience. I was in the Airborne National Guard. He goes, really? How many jumps you got? So I got 13 jumps. Okay, I'm going to send you to Charlie Company. He already had made that decision. He was testing the waters with
Right.
me. I always had direct contact with him, eyeball to eyeball.
Did you feel adequately prepared when you got there?
I felt I had an advantage, simply because of the training that I got from my platoon sergeant McAlpin. He was forced to recon in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And then my company commander was Captain Quigley. And so they made sure that I understood the role of a lieutenant in an infantry unit. And the very minute role that a lieutenant plays, two things that are important for a lieutenant to do is listen to the non-commissioned officers and take their advice, but you have to make the decision after you listen to them. And so I learned from Captain Quigley. I also learned all my weapons, because Captain Quigley told Sergeant McAlpin, I called him Sergeant Mac, when I was in the National Guard. He made me take apart the M60, the M16, the 50 caliber, headspace and timing on the 50 caliber, and then write in op orders, always reconnaissance. Can't go on a mission without a good recon, and recon's only as good as the man that's going to lead the unit. He has to be on the recon. He can't depend on somebody else's eyes. I learned that.
Were you assigned or were you deployed anywhere overseas?
I was never assigned overseas. I was always assigned to a stateside unit, but I spent a lot of time overseas, anywhere from 6 months to a year.
Yeah, explain to me the difference.
Well, the difference is I didn't take my family with me. When I deployed with the unit, whether it was a training exercise or actual combat, it was just me I had to worry about. And at the time, it was kind of the Cold War. We were getting close. And I did not want my family in Germany if the Russians did attack.
Right.
As the intelligence officers would tell us. And so there was a plan to evacuate the civilians, but the training I got from Captain Quigley was things will never happen the way the plan is. Everything changes when the first bullet is fired. You need to understand that, Lieutenant. You got to be able to, you got a plan, but then you frag. And so I wasn't going to put my family in danger, trusting the government to get them out of harm's way if the Russians hit launch.
So where did you go overseas?
I went to Germany. I went down to Panama, Colombia. I went to Korea, South Korea. We deployed there. I went to Holland and Belgium. And I'm trying to think where else. And Hawaii.
How long were these assignments? What was the average length of these assignments?
The average length of the assignments was 2 months to 6 months, with the exception of tours that I had in combat operations. My first taste of combat was really not combat as far as what I did, but I saw the difference when we got alerted to go to Grenada, and I was in the 82nd Airborne Division, and I saw the big difference. I saw how logistics came out of nowhere, all the good stuff came out, but I also realized once I was in Grenada working at the DTAC, I realized we couldn't talk to the Marine Corps. We couldn't talk to the Navy. We couldn't talk to the special ops guys. And it was very apparent that, and at that time, there was no joint training to speak of. And so one of our liaison officers, Captain Harrell, who made general, he had to get sent to Metcalf's flagship, Admiral Metcalf, who was the task force commander. And he had to set up a long whip PRC 77 on one of the tallest masts, and he'd climb up there, and that's how he would send reports. And that's how we would get messages to him, and it was set times, unless he got a frago, and then he would get on the horn and call down to the DTAC. But shortly after we got back, 3 years later, the Goldwater-Nichols Act was enacted by Congress because there was a lot of stuff that didn't go right. Thank God the enemy was not as good. And I'm being very, very honest here. And I learned a lot about that deployment, about how you can't wait to get ready when you first hear the rumors of war. And Colonel Akers taught me this because he served in the 173rd Airborne Infantry in Vietnam. They were like the 911. First cav got in trouble or fourth ID, they would send in the 173rd. He told me, and he gave me a book, and it was Fields of Fire by James Webb. And in the book he wrote, all the preparations we make in peacetime will prove inadequate when you get into combat. So always, always train harder than you think you can handle. That was the advice he gave in the book, and it made a lot of sense after Grenada.
Before any of these deployments, did you receive any sort of cultural training or language training?
No, we didn't.
Yeah.
We had to put maps together and draw north, south, east, west grid lines and put numbers. There were not enough maps, not enough 1/50. And so we got a picture of the island, and the map guys showed us how to do it, and we made our own maps. We didn't have enough maps.
That is.
And this was the 82nd Airborne Division.
And it was the Cubans that were there in Grenada. Is that correct?
It was Cubans with some Russian advisors. I never saw a Russian advisor, and I never saw any direct combat.
You served in combat roles
Yes,
than once.
Yes, sir.
Can you tell me a little bit about those experiences?
Well, I tell you, I'm writing a book, and I'm in the chapter now where I'm writing about how my entire squadron field grades were relieved 2 weeks before we crossed the LD in 1991. We lost the squadron commander, the XO, the S3, the S2. We're getting ready to launch, and we're supposed to be the 24th Infantry's Division covering force. And our task force went from 2 air troops and 1 ground troop, because the 4th ground troop came from the National Guard, 48th Brigade, but they were not prepared to go. And so they started giving us what we needed to conduct a cover and force mission. You can't do a cover and force mission without tanks. and all we had was scout vehicles. So they gave us 2 tank companies. If you're going to do a cover and force mission, you need a dedicated battery. So they gave us a 155 sub-12 battery. Then they gave us MLRS. And so all of a sudden, as the headquarters troop commander, my 230-man troop grew to about 400. All right. And I immediately started training them when we got there. Got alerted on August the 7th. And I knew where the colonel was going instinctively. I had seen that look before with Colonel Lakers. And so I started planning what I had to do. And I figured we weren't going to leave for about 2 or 3 weeks, as we had to load ships, and the ships had to get there. So I went into my mission planning on my own there. And when the colonel got back 2 hours later, first words out of his mouth was, "We're going to war, man."
And what rank were you at this time?
I was a captain promotable. I had already commanded twice in the 82nd Airborne, and I commanded a tank and Bradley company, because we did I think Colonel McGregor came up with the idea of separate brigades, and the idea that you have to train with tanks and Bradleys and infantry. You can't just throw them together at the last second. So our task force, when I was a young captain, we took everything. We got the personnel stuff. We got all the logistics, put it in our motor pool. We sent 2 Bradley companies to each of the tank battalions, and we got a tank company from each of them. And that's how we trained. So, and I think the Army had been doing that prior to 1991. Plus, the Army had also learned that you have to go against a very realistic OPFOR. So the National Training Center for a mechanized tank unit and a modern day air-land battle scenario, you had to have training where you're going against smart and capable enemy. So the American soldiers at Fort Ord in California, they were well versed. They had Vismots that replicated BMPs, T-72s, and well versed. They even had some Russian rotary aircraft, and they were good, very good. So I believe that that's what enabled the American Army to do so well in the 100-hour war.
Right. And that was, you would refer to that as your first combat experience, even though Grenada was technically a combat zone.
I had to lead a combat mission because my squadron, see, and here's why in my book, providing the details, the only people that had any kind of national training experience or combat was squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Pope, and myself. Because the squadron, prior to General McCaffrey, the squadron was the OPFOR for all the maneuver brigades. So the one ground company we had, or troop, it was replicating OPFOR BMP type stuff. So none of those people or the staff had ever deployed to the National Training Center. And so when I got there as a captain promotable, I said, I don't want to be a headquarters troop commander. I want a mech company, or I want a tank company.
Right.
Because I know how to shoot both.
Right.
And the G3 talked to McCaffrey. McCaffrey sent me down to be the headquarters troop commander. And I led a combat mission where my squadron was stuck in Sepkas. They were out of gas. They were out of ammo. And I just launched with all the tanks and Bradleys that we had fixed, and one self-propelled howitzer. Took all the fuel helmets because I found my platoon leader lost, support platoon leader. I put everything together, put him in the middle, tanks in front, and we took off, linked up with the squadron, gave them gas and ammo, cargo helmets full of ammunition for the tanks and Bradleys. And then they took off and left me there with all my soft-skin vehicles. So I had to go back through enemy-held territory. So it was a dicey adventure. But
yeah, sounds like it.
We made it okay.
What other combat experience did you have?
Well, I retired in 2002 after 22 years in the Army. And then a year later, 2003, Operation Iraqi Freedom happened. And then my son had just got commissioned. He went to the 101st, and he got orders. The unit did, and they all deployed. His entire brigade deployed on the operation. After the initial fight in 2003, a year and a half later, he would go with his brigade, and they would go to Baghdad and Mosul. And so as soon as I found that out, I had worked for General Cody before, and he was then the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army. I called him, talked to his XO, and Cody called me back and, "So why the hell did you retire, Andy?" I said, "Well, sir, if you're not going to command soldiers, I don't want to just get a paycheck." He goes, "So you want to go back in?" I go, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Why?" I said, "Because my son's going to war. I'm not going to stay home safe in my bed." So he said, "I'll get you in." And 2 weeks later, I was on my way to Fort Jackson.
Wow. Now, were you married at that time?
Yes, I just married Melinda, and I was a retired lieutenant colonel.
Yes.
She had never been a military wife.
Right.
And I pretty much just took off and left her with a whole mess.
Oh, yeah.
And unfortunately, there's nothing I could do.
Right.
I had to report to Fort Hood after Fort Jackson, and she took over everything. I gave her as much as I could give her in terms of instructions, but she had to deal with everything, to include a 13-year-old teenage daughter, our youngest.
Yeah. And so you went to Iraq and had more combat experience.
Yes, I went to be, I was supposed to go as a LNO to the Marine Corps out in Fallujah. But when I got in, they had just fired the LNO to the Corps. And so Colonel Kievanar said, "I'm going to put you as the LNO there, but I also want you to work with General Aziz, who was the defense general for the Iraqis." So I had a dual purpose, and I had a staff. I had a major and 3 captains and a bunch of NCOs. And so my time was spent between going out on patrols with the teams, with General Aziz, and then making the night meetings where they had the beef racks at the Corps. And I was the LNO there. So the major would brief me or the captain would brief me. And then I would come back and talk to General Maffey. Maffey and I were in the Ranger Battalion together. And the unfortunate thing is that combat takes its toll.
Yes.
And people don't realize that some men reach their limit sooner than other men. And it's not a question of that they're not brave. Everyone that I ever worked with was brave. But when you're a general officer, he was the ADCM, Assistant Division Commander for Maneuver. General Maffey, it was sad because I watched General Corelli, who was the 3 Corps commander, or the MCI commander, Corps commander there, walk out General Maffey. And then we got a brand new 1-star the next day. And I felt bad for my buddy because him and I would talk about some of the stuff we did in the Rangers. But it took a toll on him because he was always out. He'd see the casualty list. He'd see the wounded. I mean, I understood why.
Sure.
He reached his limit.
Sure.
And I think the Army handled it very well. And they sent him home and let him retire. And that's what should happen to people that have, for lack of a better term, severe PTSD.
Right. And so what happened to you?
in terms of the combat
Mm-hmm.
in Iraq.
Yes.
It was scary. It was different because before I had a tank or a Bradley underneath me. Now I'm in a Humvee that's not even up armored because they were working on that.
Right.
And they had a task force that was designed to do that. So we go out on patrol, but it's not foot patrols. 3 Humvees would go out, and I would go out to go work with the Iraqis, the defense ministry. I would go meet with General Aziz.
Mm-hmm.
Then we would go inspect training. I always worried about IEDs, but thank God I never hit one. None of our on any of the patrols. And it was scary to go outside of the fence. And but we did it. And the courage of my NCOs, that was unbelievable. I had a female combat medic. She was tough as nails. She was very tough as nails.
So was that your final deployment?
Yes,
Iraqi
sir.
freedom?
Yes, sir. I finished, I put my son on the airplane out of Baghdad International Airport in November the 10th, and then I redeployed on November the 19th. And while I was there, my son got blown up. He got hit, but the bullet just missed his neck because it hit the SAPI plate, but it knocked him down. And he got blown up, lost his hearing.
Wow.
But the good news was it was in an effective IED. It wasn't one of those shape charts
Right.
IEDs.
Right.
And so that's why him and his people survived. That was scary.
Yes.
And I got to see him twice. Got to see him twice when I was there. And I asked my son, and this is why it brings me back to present. The guys that do the dying are the captains and the master sergeants and below. Okay? And so we're leaving Afghanistan, and it feels like a repeat of what happened in Vietnam. And the people that suffer are the men and women that either get killed, and if they get killed, then there are children back home and wives or husbands, and now they got to deal with that absence. And I just don't understand how our general officers and our politicians can send great Americans into harm's way without a clear-cut objective. And it's one thing that it's always bothered me.
And that is very reminiscent of Vietnam, isn't it?
Yes, it is. We have some warrior generals, but I don't think I've seen one lately. General Cody, General Thurman, who I work for directly in the 4th ID, Maffey. Those guys, they're warriors. They were out every day. They were out. And my commanding general got shot down and got wounded. So he wasn't staying in the headquarters building. He was out all the time.
So how long were you in Iraq altogether?
9 months.
And after Iraq, what did you do?
I came home in November, and I retired again from the Army on February the 1st of 2007.
And your wife, who hadn't been a military wife before, was now a military wife.
Yeah, she had earned her spurs, so to speak.
Sounds like it.
She did. She was awesome.
Yeah.
The good news is, unlike 1991, where we couldn't talk on a daily basis, and so I would find out about stuff that's going on from my first wife by having to go into Dhahran before we went into battle and find out what's going on with my guys. And I almost had a couple of suicides, but it was hard to communicate. But this time, I would talk to her almost on a weekly basis to find out what's going on and everything. And then that's when I found out one day that my father, who was ill, had passed away while I was there.
I'm sorry.
And then I flew back right away to bury Dad.
Oh, you were able to make it to the funeral?
Yes, sir.
That's great.
General Thurman, I don't know what he did, but I was gone. I came in at midnight from a mission, and at 4 o'clock in the morning, they were waking me up and putting me on a C-130 out of Bayat. And so I made it back, but my son was on leave too then. But I told him to stay with his wife and his newborn child up in Maryland. And I'd take care of Barry and Pops. You need to stay with your wife and your brand new son. So I'm not sure where I was going with that. I'm losing my train of thought.
This was during or immediately after Operation Iraqi Freedom? Is that when this occurred?
No, I was already in country. And then Dad died on June the 7th.
Okay.
My son had just gone on leave, 2 weeks leave, because he got there in November. I got there in end of March.
Right.
And then I came back, continued my mission, and then the 4th ID finished her mission. We got replaced by the 1st Cav. And that's where I ran into my friend General Brooks. She was the ADCS for the 1st Cav. And we talked, and he wanted me to stay. I said, I don't think so.
Right.
So.
Sound like you did your bit.
I did my bit. My son was home safe.
Yes.
I could look myself in the mirror.
Yes.
Time to go home.
So during this period, you'd mentioned in Desert Storm or during the Desert Storm period, how you communicated or didn't communicate with your family, as it were. How did you communicate during Iraqi Freedom? What was the difference?
Well, the difference was, for starters, anytime you're in the field, you dig a hole and take care of business.
Right.
91 was the same way. It was like Vietnam. You had to burn. You burn shit. You know, I didn't.
Right.
The soldiers did.
Right.
But when I got into Baghdad, I got a room with a bathroom between me and the other colonel. I had a toilet. I had porcelain. I had a shower. I had hot water.
Right.
And I got 4 meals a day. So I was like, oh my God, this is the way to go to war.
Right.
I could not believe it, the difference. And then the soldiers were so much more competent. I mean, our army was good.
Between the two.
Yeah, our army was really good in 91 and when I was there in 2006. And the equipment that the soldiers got. When I went through Kuwait, I got 2 pair of brand new boots. I couldn't find a pair of boots to save my life in 1990 and 91. I had 1 pair of boots, black boots. And they looked white after a while.
Bet they did.
Yeah. So the Army had really improved and grown leaps and bounds.
And the communication with your family.
Telephone. Right there in the division headquarters.
Yeah.
I'd call her up. We'd talk.
That is different from 1991.
Oh, yes.
So how did you deal with stress during these stressful times? Did you?
That's all I did was, every chance I got was work out. It's the way to relieve stress. But I was at Camp Liberty, which is kind of a nice place to be. My son was at Camp Rusty or Rustamaya, which is about the size of, it's about half a square mile. And so they would get mortared and rocketed every night because they were down pretty close to Sauter City, which was a rough place to be in 2006.
What kind of challenges did your being away from home create for your family?
Well, no, I don't really remember because I think Mindy kept a lot of the stuff that was going on away from me.
I see.
And she would take care of the stuff. I didn't find out about the blown up tire. I didn't find out about a bunch of other stuff till I got home.
I see.
So she took care of everything. She was a good troop.
And what year did you leave the military?
The final time I left was 1 February of 2007.
And how long did you serve altogether?
23 and a half years. So I round up to 24.
And your rank when you left the service was?
Lieutenant Colonel.
And well, I know you were. What medals or citations were you awarded?
Well, I don't want to go through a laundry list, but...
How about we do the big ones?
All right. I got the Combat Infantry Badge in 1991. I got 2 Bronze Stars, one in 91 and one in 2006. I've got the deployment badges. Got a Legion of Merit. I mean, badges don't mean nothing to me. The only thing that means anything to me is the CIB and the Ranger tab.
I've heard that a lot.
Those are the important things to me.
Yes.
And that's just the way it is in the infantry.
Are there any other specific experiences or memories that you have of people that you served with? Anything maybe humorous? Anything happened that was funny?
When I took over the headquarters troop, I did this in May, and we already had seen the rumblings in June and July of Saddam. The first sergeant, this is my third command now. The first sergeant came in and goes, "Sir, how are we going to run this company?" I said, "Well, I ain't going to run nothing. You're running the troop. I'm just going to command it." He goes, "I like that. We'll get along." So, after 2 commands, he pretty much got everything wired down.
Right. So during your time in service, all your time in service, and maybe even take it back to your time at UTA, did you experience any discrimination?
If there was discrimination, I couldn't really identify it. I knew that I had to be better than the next guy, and that's what drove me.
Right.
And that's what drove the Jodies. That's what drove me on the IT. You never wanted to be second best.
Right.
And to that point, this is for Orlando Reyes, okay?
Okay.
He talked about how I could never beat him in anything.
Right.
The truth of the matter is, I beat him in the Ranger School. I beat him to get his airborne wing.
Okay.
And I beat him in a dance contest down in the Dry Gulch.
There you go.
You can take that and put it in the bank.
That's right. I'll make sure he gets that message. Is there anything that reminds you of your service? Anything where in day-to-day life, sights or smells or sounds or music, something like that reminds you of your time in service?
Every now and then, and my wife knows me pretty good. She always knows when not there. I'm back there.
All right.
On anniversary dates of when I lost my best friend, Phil Curtin. He was a West Point graduate. I trained him the summer between his sophomore and junior year at West Point, because the 82nd and the 101st would off and on every other year. We would go and train during the summer at Camp Buckner, which is right there at West Point. And that's where I met Phil Curtin. And then I saw him again when he was air troop commander, when I took over the headquarters troop. And he said, "I'm glad you're here. Now I'm going to call you Andy." We were tight.
Yes.
And he, on my mission, I bailed him out, but he bailed me out too. I got him gas because they were not working for the division in Cap Squadron. They had been assigned to the lead brigades, maneuver brigades. So Charlie and Delta Troop, which had Super Cobras, they were working for the brigade commanders as their forward screen. And he needed gas. He was out, so I filled him up. And then he told me to not go here because there was a tank, T-72s. So we went the other way. So he saved my life, essentially. But then I lost him in 1993, August the 7th. I got the phone call from Yuma because he was a helicopter instructor at the Marine Corps base. It's the equivalent of Top Gun for helicopters.
Right.
So yeah, he crashed and burned on the side of a mountain. And I got the phone call from Elaine, his wife. And that hits hard every summer.
Yeah. So at the same time.
Yeah.
Do you remain in contact with anyone with whom you served, either in the military or we've discussed a couple of your friends, or prior to the military at UTA? Who do you remain in contact with?
I lost contact with everybody once I got in the Army. But then once I got back, I ran into Orlando and, of course, Ranger Martinez. And so we were always tight. And I met Ranger Martinez again, when I was teaching ROTC, because after I left the Army in 2002, I began to teach ROTC at James Madison High School.
Oh, okay.
And I wasn't a judge, but I coached my armed drill team.
Oh.
So I invited Ranger Martinez to come observe my team and give me some pointers. And he was very impressed.
Yeah.
He couldn't believe that an IT guy was coaching this team.
Right.
Which I thought was ironic.
Right.
But and so then Axel and I we got pretty close. And I don't have a lot of friends. I'm very careful about who I call friends.
Yes.
Martinez is one. Reyes is one.
Yes.
Tony Molina, who was a police officer in San Antonio. We're real tight. And then my Ranger buddy who worked for me in my last tour at Fort Sam, Ranger Spiro. He was in Desert Storm as well, but he was with the 82nd Airborne. I was with the 24th Infantry.
And besides teaching ROTC after you served, what else did you do?
Well, I volunteered. So my wife and I, Mindy, we used to deliver food every Tuesday. And then we started picking up the food that we brought to everybody else so they could go deliver. And then we did our route. And I joined the Lions Club. And we were busy there. But I didn't work. I retired from teaching ROTC in 2013 because I had to have back surgery.
I see.
And I had it, and I was really no good no more.
Right.
So I retired.
Jumping out of planes does that to you?
Jumping off of tanks and Bradleys as well.
Yeah. James Madison High School, where was that?
That's in San Antonio, part of the Northeast Independent School District.
Okay. And how did you end up in the San Antonio area?
I was supposed to take command of a provisional battalion at Fort Stewart, Georgia, which are now called TSBs. And those are command. Right then it was provisional. They needed somebody to train the 48 National Guard. So the guy that got brigade command recruited me to be the provisional battalion commander. And I had to stay at Fort Stewart again. And I said, no, I ain't going to do that to my daughter.
Yeah.
Because she was getting ready to enter high school.
Ah, yeah.
So I said, nah, being in 06 is cool, but
Right.
screwing my daughter so that I can make 06,
right.
That's not good. So I elected to tell Branch that I wanted to go to San Antonio and I wanted to go work somewhere at Fort Sam and give the command to someone else.
Okay.
And that's how I got.
So what'd you do at Fort Sam?
Believe it or not, I got the easiest job there is.
Mm-hmm.
I was a tactics instructor for all the nurses and doctors that go to basic and advanced courses there.
Well, Army medics work harder than Air Force medics. I'm just going to say that right now because I didn't know what a bidet was when I got my room in Cobar Towers at Daron. I'm just saying. Do you have any advice for people entering the military or going into college looking to a military career? Do you have any advice for them?
The only advice, and it's the advice I gave my kids, was you have to do three things. Keep your word. It's only you can give up that. You give it up. No one can take it from you. Right. Your integrity. Always do every job, whether it's mopping or collecting garbage or being a doctor. Always do it to the best of your abilities. Don't take shortcuts. And then the third thing I told them was, always remember where you came from. And you're better off than a lot of people. That's the advice I would give people. They're going into service.
If you could serve, would you do it all over again?
Yes, sir, I would.
Would you do it the way you did it?
Yes, sir, I would. Yes, sir, I would.
How often do you return to the UTA campus, and what do you think of the changes that have occurred there?
Well, up until this last year, I used to go there. The last 4 years, I'd been going, but then last year we didn't go because of the COVID.
Right. Yeah.
And I was working with Colonel Parker, assisting him in the preparation of the Hall of Honor.
And I was going to ask you about that. I've got two questions about the Hall of Honor for you.
Sir.
First of all, your induction into the Hall of Honor. What was that experience like for you?
Well, it was really a good experience. I had been to Orlando's Hall of Honor induction. And that was really grand the way we did it. And then Ranger Martinez, I think he got inducted the following year. And then Orlando nominated me, and Powers that Be said yes. And so it was a good experience. I brought my wife, my mother-in-law, and my daughter. My son was in the military, so he couldn't make it. And the other son was working in San Antonio. He couldn't make it, couldn't get off. But it was a good experience. I never thought I'd be in the Hall of Honor. I didn't think I was good enough.
And you're in with quite an impressive group of people. And you nominated, if I understand correctly, you nominated Larry and Claudia Pink. Is that true?
Yes, I did.
Tell me a little bit about the inspiration for that.
Well, Larry Pink gave up a lot of things. He's a good family man, and gave up getting his degree so that his wife could get her degree.
Yes.
And they're still together.
Yes.
He's the only one out of the whole group
Yeah.
They're still with the same woman that he married many years ago. But he's done a lot of service for the community. And, you know, people that get into the Hall of Honor are usually, in my opinion, people that have served a long time or did something. They were astronauts or something like that.
Sure.
Larry Pink and Claudia needed to go in there. So I nominated him. Larry Pink is very quiet. He doesn't say a whole lot.
He did say that Claudia has been his commanding officer for over 40 years.
Yeah. She outranks him.
Yeah.
In more ways than one.
Right. So is there anything that you would like to add to this interview that we haven't covered?
There's nothing I want to add other than the Army was not a job to me. The Army was a calling. It was a labor of love. Not that I wanted to go to war or have any of my guys get killed or wounded. The Army, the role of the officer in the Army is to command, set standards, and then allow the subordinates to execute. And when they make mistakes, the job of an officer is not to relieve that NCO or enlisted man. It is to retrain him, teach him what he did wrong, and let him go at it again. In other words, you have to underwrite the failures of the people below you so that they then will be emboldened to carry out the orders and missions without any guidance. All they need to understand is what is the commander's intent. And if you train them that way and let them make their mistakes in peacetime, it provides big dividends. I mean, they will work like crazy for you. There's nothing they won't do for their commander.
Well, I want to thank you for the time that you've spent in this interview. Thank you for agreeing to interview. Well, thank you for your service to the country.
Thank you, sir.